the one volunteer and the two chosen volunteers who will present us the results of the 3 working groups in a short moment. And I would like to start asking Ms. Andrea Murray from the Equality and Human Rights Commission, United Kingdom, to present to us the working group's results of the gender-based violence and men and masculinity group. To start with her, and then we continue with my colleagues from EIGE.
Thank you, Barbara. We combined 2 workshops, the gender-based violence and the men's role in gender equality, which turned out to be a very useful, very interesting discussion, I think. And we had 2 excellent presentations about the current situation in Poland and in Spain, which also turned out to have interesting common factors in them. So I've tried to distill the main points which we discussed, which I'll talk a little bit about as we go through. Someone very sensibly raised the issue of definitions. Why do we say gender-based violence? What does that cover, which violence against women does not cover? And we very sensibly avoided that conversation, other than to say that it is a live conversation in the Council of Europe discussions, and that any definitions which are used by the European Commission and by EIGE are likely to draw on other definitions from the International Convention on Women's Rights and also on the Beijing definitions. A comment in relation to EIGE's proposed activity was that not all good practices in the Nordic countries when it comes to men engaging in gender equality issues, and we should not assume that to be the case. But our EIGE colleagues pointed out that when they asked for men to participate in an event on good practice in gender equality, only men from the Nordic countries turned up. So there is a challenge to you, colleagues from other countries, where you know of good practice and good contacts in your countries. Please let EIGE know of them so that this can be a truly European network and we can take advantage of people's experience. Then we turn to the substance of the question of men's role in violence against women. And interestingly, again, both the Polish and the Spanish presenters commented about control, and particularly about control in a context where men are losing power in other ways, in economic restructuring, or where roles in the home and in the workplace are changing, and that men are using violence as a method of asserting control over women. Another issue which came up very interestingly across a number of countries was what I've called here men's backlash groups, groups which are reacting against a loss of power and have been using the language of family and children's rights to oppose issues around domestic violence particularly, but also around divorce. And we talked about groups which use the language of parental alienation syndrome. Am I right, Miguel? Is that the expression? Which is particularly used in Spain, but also is widespread on the internet, and is now deliberately gender neutral, as opposed to the malicious mother syndrome, which it was previously known as. As I'm sure you can guess, it's based on the idea that women are falsely alleging violence in order to get residence of their children, and saying that the courts are helping those women to split up families. And certainly it's a phenomenon I'm familiar with in Britain, but it seems to be extremely widespread. There was a brief comment which we didn't have time to explore in detail about what do we do about passive men. We've slightly caricatured the good guys who are with us in this struggle and the bad guys who are actively opposing change. What about the large group in the middle who are tolerating violence, either in language or where they know violence is taking place, who might stand up for different models of masculinity if they were engaged in it? We thought there might be a role for EIGE to bring together what I've called here the good men's groups. I'm sure we'll have to think of a better term than that, so that they can exchange practice. A very useful suggestion that men's health is a very good way into getting them to talk and question masculinity, and it's a good issue which has been a silent issue for them, but which can be used to help them think in more detail. And that was a suggestion, I should say, from a man, not just us saying, wouldn't it be good if? And finally, the point that women have moved into the public sphere, but it's still very hard for men to move into caring. And that even men who wish to spend more time caring for their children are having difficulties accessing flexible working possibilities, even where the law helps them out. The attitudes of their colleagues and their employers is making it difficult for them to take on that role, and that we need to devote attention to that. And our final slogan for the day, this is copyright to Miguel: men are part of the problem and also part of the solution. Thank you.
I come now to my colleague Lisa, who was a chosen volunteer from the group on statistics. Thank you, Lisa.
We had 3 very interesting presentations. It's a shame that you couldn't be, all of you, in the same workshop. We had the possibility, Didier from Eurostat gave us a little bit the perspective of what is going on concerning capture gender statistics, sex disaggregated data in the European Union statistical system. We had the possibility to see some data, how it works, how some member states are ranked, we then had a wonderful presentation of Ms. Karen Barnes from OECD, who gave us a more worldwide perspective and who shared with us the experience of OECD in the Social Institutions Gender Equality Index. Yeah. And we also had the chance to see how it works worldwide. Of course, that the focus are quite different. The dimensions are quite different from what we should take into account, what would probably be taken into account in the development of the European Union Gender Equality Index. But nevertheless, it was interesting to see the difficulties and how hard could be to reflect, to capture the reality of inequalities into a single index. And then, very nicely, our colleague from Spain also showed us a little bit what is going on in Spain. And there was a focus also concerning gender-based violence and how the statistical system in Spain is trying to respond to capture in the reality of inequalities. And it was particularly interesting to see the example of gender-based violence. If I forgot something, please add. And then we had we didn't have a big discussion because I think that we agreed on almost everything. But it was curious that it was stated, namely by Didier, that data is available. So there's availability of data. It is probably lacking a gender analysis perspective. And one example is the gender pay gap report from the Belgium presidency. Here we have a slight discussion because nevertheless we also agree that not all of course, that lots of aspects of inequalities are not measured and are very difficult to measure, actually. And one example, of course, is gender-based violence, among others.